Good morning and welcome to the Leadership and Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm exceptionally lucky because we don't have any repeat guests. I think you're the second ever repeat guest on the podcast, but I'm joined by the wonderful Bryan Falchuk. Bryan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for, I should say for having me on, but I did harass you into letting me on. So I pushed my way through. But thank you for breaking your rules or making an exception. I appreciate
Anyone that knows you, Bryan, you're the nicest harasser anyone could know. It
it.
was a very polite ask, and no, we're really excited to have you on because um, it's the launch of your new book, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Revolution. This is volume 3, The Collaborators, working together to move insurance forward faster. And it's a book that you writ with alongside wrote alongside David Ritz. And of course, forward by the Queen of Insurance herself, Sabine
Right.
van der Linden. So
Yeah.
I think we're ticking off all the big insurtech names in one go there. I think there's a few missing. We'll miss them
We
out
got,
for
and
now. But
Nigel Walsh is on the back cover. So we get like, it just
yeah.
keeps, yeah. No, the names keep coming.
Where's Matteo and why haven't I got a review on the front cover? I think that's what
I
comes
think it
next.
was, yeah, I think I was just afraid Mateo would say something really harsh about it. So I was just like, I'll avoid that. But yeah, you never
Um,
know.
yeah, we never know. There's still time. He still might. You never
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
So no, Bryan, thank you for coming in. I think the reason I was so excited to talk to you about this book is I think collaboration and the evolution of where it is within the insurtech spectrum means that this is such a important time to talk about this kind of issue.
Yeah.
Um, and why don't we start? We normally start with introducing the business, but I think we should introduce the book and give it some context. And yeah, just give us a bit of flavour for the people that the as yet unreleased book.
Yeah.
What's included in it?
Yeah, so this is, as you said, it's the third book in this series that I've been working on called The Future of Insurance. And the point of the book series is really to sort of give inspiration and a bit of guidance, a bit of, I think, fun, to be honest, to
Mhm.
people who are kind of, wishing for more, feeling like there's opportunity out there, there's better that we could achieve. And I feel stuck. I don't know how to go about that. We've been trying it. We're better than we were, but are we really where we could be? And I think it's been an incredible time in, since lockdowns hit, for change in the industry because all of a sudden people were forced to change. And a lot of those excuses were valid, but you couldn't stand by them anymore because you didn't have a choice. You couldn't handle claims, you couldn't take new business, you couldn't anything if you insisted on, well, this is how we've always done it. So that's the space that these books have been coming out in. And I was lucky to tell the stories of 15 different insurers firsthand. I sat down with the people themselves and heard from them and then wrote up my version of what they told me in the interviews. Um, Legacy carriers, insurtech startups, because in either side of that coin, no matter where you sit in the industry, old school, new school, or something else entirely, there's so much you can learn from what they did. And it may be a direct corollary to your experience, or it could be so different that it sort of breaks you out of the bounds of what you've been living in and starts to get you thinking more freely. And even if they're a failure, there's still something you can learn from them or something you could take that, bring it into your context, resources, your successes. Could that failure actually thrive with the backing of all that you have to bring to the table? So I found it to be this really interesting and inspiring way to help push the industry. But what I kept hearing was, well, Bryan, which one's going to win, the insurtechs or the legacy folks? And I think like it's a fun question, but it's also a silly question because there is no one side is going to win. And I've been trying to make that point all along. What struck me is my own experience that I came from the legacy world. I spent 20 years in the carrier side. And then I went to the insurtech world, a solution provider, not an insurtech carrier. But one side of me didn't win. I mean, both did. And that's sort of the notion is what if we came together and worked together? And we've been trying to do that as an industry. And I sold into the carrier space when I was at an insurtech. Um, it's really hard and it's really slow. And we mean well and we want to get that ROI and we want to have the impact that we envision, but we all know how that ends up, right? It takes much longer than we thought. It's much more expensive and the ROI, the benefits case is never what was promised up front. And it's just like, what if we actually didn't have to have it that way? What do we need to change and be honest with ourselves about to make that more fruitful? And that's really the genesis of this third book is let's hear the firsthand stories that all of us live. Maybe I've got a few carriers who are willing to sort of open the kimono and be honest about what's going on, what went well and why, what didn't go so well. And in hindsight, we would have done this differently or, watched out for this pitfall. And so how can we all take those lessons in and just do better and move the industry forward faster? Because we're putting a ton of effort in. Let's get the payback that we're intending to have for ourselves, our partners, our customers.
Mm. I think that's there's so much resonance with me there, because I think when I think about insurtech and the way that we've defined insurtech, um, and Jonathan Crystal brought this up with me when I was interviewing him for the kind of VC snapshot that we took at Insurtech New York, was that I made the phrase digital MGA,
Yeah.
and he said, Alex, it's just an MGA. And I think, when we talk about the new insurance companies that come onto the scene, the Lemonades, the Hippos, etc., we're still framing them in an insurtech landscape, and they're
Right.
just carriers. They just
Yeah.
got a digital footprint. So when you frame it like that, and then you talk about who's going to win insurtech versus insurance carriers, well, no one on their own, because if the carriers don't exist, the insurtechs don't have a place to be in the world. It doesn't exist. But what I've kind of, I forget how many waves we're supposed to be on. I think we had wave 1 and then 2 or 3. I've lost count of which wave we're on, but certainly what I'm seeing is slightly more mature businesses or approach to businesses where collaboration seems to be absolutely key.
Yeah.
But there's no playbook in how to get collaboration right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the sort of challenge seems to be.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think it is a forced divide, or we're forcing the labels on because it makes conversations interesting.
Yeah.
But the reality is ultimately we're all in the same space. We're all working together, and what's going on in one pocket can be used by or benefited from in another pocket, especially if we come together. There isn't a playbook for successful collaboration per se, but there's a lot of presumed playbooks, if you will. Like a lot of people are like, well, this is how we do it. And I don't think they've ever stopped to wonder is, yeah, but how's that working for you? How many projects that you scoped out, X amount of months or years are well beyond that. And so for you to keep coming back to, but this is the way we do it, you're like, as the Brits would say, we're making a rod for our own back.
Yeah.
Because of that sort of dogmatic resistance to other approaches, or recognizing, what, we may not know everything. We may not be the best at this. What if we took the advice of this company that has, 100th the years of experience that we have? Maybe they know something different. And that's, I think if there's anything that I've taken from my own experience, is humility is the single most important human value when it comes to leadership or success. And I think we need to bring that into all of our collaborations as well. Just because someone's new or their offices look funky, if they even have them, or they're wearing a Hawaiian shirt like I've got under my sport coat, I'm collaborating on the clothing side. Of course, I'm collaborating on the hair side. I get the same haircut as you now. Maybe these weirdos actually know something too. And you know what I love, actually, when you talk about the waves, the first wave was very like outsider, tech heavy, judgmental, like, oh, these insurance idiots, these dinosaurs, they're all going to die, and we're going to be the ones to put them out of their misery. The second wave, whether we're in 2 or 3, but that shift from the first wave really was about having the insurance expertise on board. And I think that's what you see now more, whether it's an insurer, a digital MGA or MGA, or a solution provider. There's this recognition that actually the core fundamentals of insurance matter, and it's very difficult. And it's not that these people are all stupid or dinosaurs. It's really hard stuff. And when you come in with that hubris again, hubris exists on both sides of the startup legacy equation. You miss that stuff. So I think for all of us to just recognize there are better ways to do it. What if we just talked openly about that and we're willing to actually take those ideas in and try them?
It's it's interesting reflection on my own business in that, you know, I came from the world of insurance, and then I worked in recruitment for big insurers, and then I worked as a search consultant in a small boutique business. And then I moved into this insurtech space, and then I started out with that. I'm going to sell you a search, and a search for me was like 100-page document, super detailed, like review of all these potential candidates, market mapping. It's going to take me 3 months, and then I'll deliver you someone. And I was speaking to these startups, going, we don't want that at all. You know, we want the level of caliber you're talking about, but we don't have that time. And and I remember I had to sort of step back from my own ego and say, okay, I have to listen to the customer for one, and then secondly, you have to go that these people might know something I don't, because their experiences are different to mine, because they were coming from tech, fast moving tech. There wasn't any time for that. And so even in my own world, I think I had to adopt and adjust, and like you, I had to adopt maybe a Hawaiian shirt rather than my kind of three-piece suit that I used to wear to everything. So I think even cultural, and I wanted to ask you about culture as well, and I'm going to make sure I purposely go back to the book and the case studies certainly in a second. But do you think that insurance is unique in its culture of collaboration, because it's got a strange relationship with collaboration because it's inherently collaborative, but then it also seems to struggle to collaborate with outsiders and technology providers? Are we
Yeah.
in a unique position there?
Well, I certainly think we are. And I've really only worked in insurance. I've done a little consulting for my time at McKinsey outside, but then I was long to come back to insurance. I'm just strange like that. From what I've found, pretty much every industry um, thinks that all other industries are the same and they're the one unicorn. So whether we're
Mm.
truly different or not, I can't say, but it does feel different. And I love what you were just hitting on, because I keep reminding people this. When we get really difficult about our competitors and we can't share this with them because, they're competitors. Well, first of all, your rate and your form are all filed. So, maybe not on the E&S side, but on plenty of lines of business, it's filed, it's publicly available. Second of all, do you use reinsurance? Every single insurer has reinsurance, and most reinsurers have reinsurance somewhere in their portfolio, which means what you're doing affects your competitor and what they're doing affects you, not just from your open competition, but if you have heavy losses, it's going to drive up their re-rates as well, and vice versa. So in a sense, we're all collaborative without even really thinking about it just from the capital base. But
Mhm.
ultimately, insurance is risk pooling and risk sharing. So that in and of itself is collaboration. And I think it's funny, right? We are actually not the best collaborators in the world. We do get in a very like, we know best. We can't talk about this secret sauce. It's all in our loss history. We can't let anyone know that. Yet the very nature of our business is sharing. And I think if we try to get back to those fundamentals, and then maybe act a little bit more collaboratively, you'd be surprised how well things can go. And I think it is about that sort of let's suspend disbelief, kind of the art of the possible thinking. And there's one case in particular where the CIO sort of like stands up in this room of non-believers. And I'm sure it was less friendly than the way he put it when I was interviewing him, but was sort of like, this software works. We're going to assume it works, and it works out of the box. And I don't want to hear it otherwise. Like, you have to live with it before you genuinely can't. You can't tell me before you've even tried it that it doesn't work. And because they were trying to put something in without changing it, because we all change it, we all customize it, even when we say it's going to be, configuration, not customization, and that goes out the window instantly. It really, that was like this huge culture shift for them, but he had to be a bit difficult, I think, and forceful up front. And after, a few months of living that way, he's like, I couldn't get them to customize it now if I tried, because they've seen, they get what they need quickly and it works well and it's supported and it gets upgraded, like all of the exponential benefits that come from just that upfront, like, what have we trusted our partner? Is like, you have to just assume it works. And if you think it won't work, why did we select it? Is a really good point. We do this in contracting, right? Like, contracting is a tough thing because it's sort of like preparing for everything falling apart, because that's not the time to figure out how to sort it out. But like, before you've even started working together, your biggest effort is this document that assumes everything was terrible. And how do you sort through that? And so he's like, we went into that with the presumption that the software would work, and that it just changes the attitudes right off the bat. But that's a tough change, and you have to do that really consciously, and actually like living that when it like it's one thing to say it, but when you're actually in the midst of contract negotiation, like why are you angry with each other? You haven't even started working together yet. Because it's just
Yes.
like we have a bigger problem if that's really the way things are going at this point.
Mm. The CIO example, I think is really important, because I think when you're talking there, they're saying something, and I don't know if this is one of the lessons, it's the support from top down. There's a C-suite support of collaboration, and they're doing it in a really, you know, let's be honest, adults listen to this podcast. It's a non-bullshit version of doing it. It's like, you will adopt this technology, you will make it work, and I don't want to hear anything about it. And I think humans are, even the best change adopted humans are very prone. We like habit, we like pattern, we like pattern recognition. So everything is quite difficult, even for those that embrace that stuff. But even the sort of minor 3% of people that really resist that change can really endemically damage an attempt at collaboration or attempt at change, because that dissenting voice is it's really powerful. It's viral in its nature in terms of kind of whether something's going to be adopted. So having that top-down C-suite kind of approach is. Did you see a theme of that in the sort of positive collaborations, that it was
Yeah.
C-suite level support?
Well, and so it didn't come out as a core lesson, and it's not to say it isn't important, but it's because that in and of itself doesn't guarantee you success.
Sure.
And so we saw that, in every case you see like, oh, there's great buy-in at the top. That's fantastic. Nothing wrong with that. But if it's just buy-in at the top with
Mhm.
none of the other kind of supporting mechanisms and norms in place, then it's worthless. And then people feel like, well, that guy's in his ivory tower. He has no
Yeah.
clue what the front line's about. Or, she's over here thinking everything's great because she shows up once a month and, bought us bagels for one of the meetings, and somehow that entitles her to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
What you found instead is it's about the frequency of the meetings. It's about making really just pragmatic, rational decisions, even when they may feel like it's not what you wish you could make. And in a perfect world, you do something different. It doesn't mean you always can. So there's something about the meeting frequency. And in a couple of the cases, they're really clear. Like we had to meet every week. They get like the C-suite of a multi-billion-dollar, multi-hundred-million-dollar business together every week. Of course, everybody balked about that up front, or they all went in with the presumption like, yeah, these will start falling off. We'll go to every other week, maybe once a month. But you find that as soon as you do that, then decisions take 4 or 5 months. Because the one time you did meet that month, someone was off. They were out sick, they were on holiday, whatever it was. And so you couldn't make the decision. And so you got to punt to the next month, and then someone else was out. And it's like this 6-month long or 12-month long project ended up taking 3 years simply because we couldn't make decisions when we needed to. I'm seeing this with a digital MGA that I'm working with, where their fronting carrier, their capacity, keeps punting underwriting committee decision because a key person's not there each time, and it's a different person each time, and it's been 5 months of this, and
Wow.
it's basically already been signed off, but there's one niggling question, and it's like, well, why don't you all get on email and solve it? Or you're all in the same office when you happen to be together, could you not just speak?
Mhm.
And that's the kind of stuff that they have tons of executive buy-in. It doesn't matter because the
Mhm.
structures of how they deliver that buy-in are totally broken. And that's what we need to get past. And they're responsible. This is when we meet.
Mhm.
Um, okay, but it's not working. So
Yeah.
at what point are you willing to admit that? And I think that's where it's not just the buy-in. You have to recognize a lot of other things need to come along for the ride, or the buy-in is ceremonial.
Yeah. Yeah. I was suppressing a really painful laugh of a search I'm doing at the moment, which everyone has agreed to hire this person, but they only meet every X day to
Yeah.
make a decision. So we have to wait for that day to then get the offer. And then the offer has to go out on the X day, because that's the process. You're thinking,
Yeah.
guys, what are we doing here? Like we've all agreed. So yeah, sort of process of process's sake well, it's the biggest ill in, I think, in business. I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned about the case studies, and that's
Yeah.
the structure of the book. You sat down with 15 different sort of case study example, but I think, is there 5 in the book? Is there 5
Yeah,
specific?
so there were 15 in the across the first two, and there's 5 carriers in this one, but it's 5 carriers plus 5 solution providers. So there's a little bonus in there. So there's 10 companies in this. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's all firsthand. So I sat down with the insurers and with their partners, sometimes together, sometimes separate, sometimes both. And, just heard like from that first interaction, or when you first learned about this or first had a need for something, to where you're at today. Give me the nitty gritty,
Mhm.
really the play by play, and let's dig into those highs and those lows and see, what drove the highs, and when you hit those lows, could you have avoided them? Did you make those lows yourself?
Yeah.
What have you put in place now to avoid that? And have you tested it? Has it worked out differently? And let's share all that. So as you can imagine, um, there's only 5. There were more carriers in the prior books because not everyone likes to admit when things didn't go well.
Yeah.
And B, not every carrier, and I think this is a common thing for our industry, we don't like to say who we work with.
Mm,
If you look at like the telematics and usage-based insurance, pretty much all of those are branded as the insurer's offering.
yeah.
Um, I struggle to think of any that were actually developed, created, and run by the insurer. Those tools, the little dongles, the apps, they're all from third parties. But no one brands it that way. So if you were to admit, like, oh, we did this with these guys and it's actually their solution, not everyone's comfortable with that. So it's,
Mm,
it's tricky.
mm. It's, I wonder if that says something about your sample pool, that they're inherently probably better collaborators, better innovators, because they're prepared to sit down and talk about six wins or failures, in the space. But that might be too deep for this podcast. I'm not sure.
Yeah, might be true. I'm not saying it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice theory. I suppose, not wanting to let anyone cheat, Brian, because they should go out and buy this book and read this book. But what's your overridingly? I want to talk about kind of like take key takeaways in a
Yes.
section, but like, how do we get better at collaboration? What was this just like, if you had your strap line message for how do
Yeah.
we do this?
So I'm a terrible book sales person because I'm perfectly fine giving away like the secrets of the book. And it's because I don't write the books to sell the books. I write the books to try to help the industry. And so if someone gets enough from this conversation, fantastic. If they want to get more detail, they love that. And I think it's actually fun and inspiring to read these stories. But there are 3 major takeaways, and I've hinted at some of them through this conversation. But the first is, and I said this one in particular, is make fast, rational decisions. Um, well, that sounds obvious. Don't make irrational decisions, but you'd be surprised. The speed is critical. So, how frequently are the decision makers involved and meeting? And are you giving yourself credit because it's more frequent than it used to be? We used to meet quarterly and now we're meeting monthly. It's like, that's still not good enough. What do you actually need for this delivery? And so you have to meet fast enough. And you need to make the right decisions for the right reasons. And because we've always done it this way, or because we've never done that before, are not valid reasons. Um,
Mhm.
why are you doing this project in the first place? And if you can't come back to the true value and purpose of that, because of politics or insecurity or something else that isn't a better business outcome for you or your customers or your partners, then that is not a rational decision. So don't claim something's rational when it isn't. And you have to be really honest with yourself here. And obviously, lots of examples and experiences in the book to speak to that, including somewhere they weren't making the most rational decisions. And they're like, yeah, we were doing this for the wrong reason. And we saw that. And here's what we did to, to change. Um, Another one that sounds fairly obvious is be on the same team. And by that, I mean between the startup or the insurtech and the carrier, it's not those people, that vendor, it's all you. And, that same CIO, one of the things he said is, and he's spot on about this, core system projects is what that one was about. We hire an SI, a systems integrator or consultant, or, the vendor does it. And if things fall behind, it's like, oh, that SI screwed up, or we replaced the SI. And, it's always like laying blame. Actually, what he said is, you're the one who paid the checks. You're the one who signed the contract. It's you. Doesn't matter if like everything they did was wrong and nothing you did was wrong. If you made the decision, it is your project, it's your responsibility. So this notion of a separation is false. And the more you reinforce that, the worse things will be. So get on the same team, be willing to pick up, as if you're working for the same company. And I can hear the general counsels listening saying, but hang on a second, employment law, you can't treat them like they're the same company, because I'm not saying that. You don't have to start offering them benefits, and you're not going to cross that line, I assure you.
Mhm.
Uh, but to draw a hard line between us and them, and to think of them as vendors instead of partners, even, um, I lived that myself. You could see the stark difference, and the projects where we were all working together were the ones that implemented faster, much more engagement, better outcomes, all of it. And the ones where it was, no, you're something different from us. We're not going to tell you everything. We're not going to put the effort in that we're expecting of you, vice versa. Um, those are the ones that didn't do well. So just be humans about it, right? Like, it's your business. You should be willing to just work together on it.
I'm going to soundbite you with that, Brian, and send it to every
Please.
potential client I have, because where it goes really, really well, we're part of the team. But that's
Yeah.
the way it works. We
Yeah.
are on board. We're doing everything. Where it goes badly as a vendor is exactly that, like no information,
Right.
otherized, clear definition between us and them, not shared information. And it's a simple business what we do, but it's the speed that you can do anything, or the success you can do anything, is all based on kind of, are you on the same team? So it might be kind of obvious advice, but I don't think it's taken on board.
Yeah. I can think of being on the receiving end of your work, not you specifically, but other search work, and you could tell that something was being hidden, and
Yeah.
like it's gonna come out. And so then I'm stuck with, okay, I'm now living with this thing that was not shared with me. That's clearly part of the culture or the political dynamics. I'm not happy about that. The search folks would not have hidden that had they known.
Mhm.
Uh, but I can't say anymore. It gets awkward.
We'll
But
talk about that when we see
yeah,
each other
maybe
face
offline
to
sometime.
face.
Um,
Yeah.
but then the last one is an interesting point, because it's not, and look, none of these points is explicitly just between you and the third party. A lot of them go internally because we're collaborating amongst ourselves, different functions, different operating units, what have you. This one is really blatantly as much an internal thing as an external thing. And it's about respecting the lanes of responsibility. And this actually came from one of the startups themselves, Ben Akiva. It was like a founding principle for their three co-founders. It was important that each one of them has a voice in the whole business. So, the CEO, even though he's not responsible for the tech, he has as much an ability to talk with the CTO about their technical decisions, but ultimately the CTO is responsible for the decision itself. And because they had that collaborative, open, respectful conversation where everyone is a peer, the CEO and same thing for the CEO, they knew that they could stand by that final decision because they respected the process behind it, and the fact that each one of them has their specific areas of responsibility that extended to how they go about their client interactions. And I saw this in some of the other cases as well. Everyone has an area of responsibility, and you need to respect that. And so that can be little things like, one of them was talking about the clients sending them little mock-ups and wireframes for how the system should work. And it's like, that's very nice. Our responsibility is to design the system, the UX, and all that, because that's our sweet spot. Yours is to give us the business requirements, and your need as an insurance business that is trying to, have this process complete, not to tell us like, then it has to go to Johnny because Johnny presses this button, and that, because that's how you've always worked. It's not necessarily the best way to do it. So tell us what business outcome you need, leave the wireframing to us. And it's not a rude thing. It's not about like throwing the wireframes back at them when they hand them to you, but it's about both sides understanding we each have a role to play here. We need a collaborative interaction, but ultimately the responsible party needs to be the responsible party. And the internal implications for that is, there's a lot more corporate venture capital activity going on. And so in a couple of the cases, there were investments as well as customer or partner decisions. And you see where Nationwide was one of the investors in what became a partner of theirs, a company called Kinetic. And when they were trying to get Kinetic live as an MGA with an IoT solution, there were some IT kind of roadblocks where Nationwide, very large, complex business, they have procedures for how long it takes for systems to be spun up and to access to be given and that sort of thing. But the VCs could have said, look, we took balance sheet money, millions of dollars, put them into these folks. You're standing in the way. They have a go live date that you're putting at risk. You have to just make this happen. That would have worked. It would have worked once, right? It would not have built the right long-term kind of relationship. So rather than stepping on toes or pulling a balance sheet rank on them or going to the CEO or any of that, they said, hey, we've made this investment. Here's why. This is where they're at, working with your team. This is a roadblock we're hitting. We know you have these processes for good reason. Is there any alternative approach or other way that we could get through this so that their go live date could be supported? If not, could you help us think about other ways to accelerate to try to catch up for that? So it wasn't a like thou shalt or, like you must do this because we're more valuable than you or more important or whatever, or we know someone higher up than you do. It was like, hey, here's what we're trying to achieve. And we know you're trying to achieve this. Could you help us kind of work through this? And what thoughts do you have? Like, let's be partners. And recognizing that's IT's decision. That's their responsibility. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how much power you have. You don't own that. So you can't just step on them and try to bully them into doing it. That's for them. But have that collaborative approach up front, and you build a company of partners instead of people who are scared to work with you, hope you don't come knocking. Which one do you think long term is going to work out for the best? It's not the bullying approach. So there's a lot of that comes out, and luckily not through failures. It's not like, oh, we had scared everyone and they hated us, and so we had to fix our image. It was like, no, we knew up front we could not operate that way, and that you see this all the time. Companies where I've worked at so many where IT is referenced like a person. Well, IT said this, or I'm like, who's IT? I work for British carriers for 10 years, and
Yeah.
I'm still waiting to meet London. It's like, well, London said in the US. I'm like, who is this London guy? He's terrible. I don't ever want to get to meet with him. We have to stop that. Like, we just have to stop that. There's no person named IT. We have to respect who owns what and work with them and not talk about them behind their backs.
Yeah, there is a child called It though, so
there is. And actually there was a guy at one of the carriers whose last name was London and he was British. So I was like, I've met him. He's actually like really laid back. I don't think he's, and then I realized, yeah, it's not him.
London's on board. No, I think that's that it's that thing about trying to get people on board and we've said it before. I made that point at the top. Yes, it's important to be supported by the C-suite, but you can't use hierarchy to force people into doing things as a sort of bullying tactic, because that's not collaboration. They're not coming with you. You're enforcing things, and as you say, once it's like it might kickstart behavior, but unless everyone's on board, it's not going to have the momentum. These projects are not. I mean, the timeline as well is something that you've touched on. Is that the timeline for these businesses, selling to a carrier, getting on board and embedded with the carrier. We do lots of kind of sales, go-to-market type work with insurtech businesses, finding them those sorts of staff. And we're rarely talking about timescales that are less than 12 months. What do you think that, this is something that's come up. What do you think that means from an actual VC perspective? And so something we've noticed is the increasing prominence of the CVC space. Do you think that's a natural kind of reflection of just how difficult it is to get traction in this space?
Yeah, I think it is. I was lucky to sit on a panel just this week as we're recording this with a friend of mine from business school, and she works at one of the top VCs in the space. And she was commenting on how, she talked about, I think 2 waves, whatever she's talking about. Same question, how many waves? But the first wave, not only was it a lot of tech outsiders, the money was outsider as well. And I saw this. I worked at a firm that their Series A was led by a fantastic VC with an incredible track record. They're behind, very much everyday brand names that we would all know. And and respect. This was their first insurance play. And the partner was brilliant, great guy. Had so many wonderful ideas that were so many horrible ideas for insurance.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Like, he meant well, but he's from a B2C, like everyday brands, definitely B2C, a lot of direct kind of business. So he's like, what if you let adjusters pay with their corporate card for the solution? And then and that's how we get in, because that bar would be really low. And then the head of claims would be like, oh, wow, that's fantastic. Let's give it to everyone. I'm like, no, they'll fire the adjuster. They will not use us. They'll never use us. They'll fire the adjuster for doing something so bold and
Yeah.
putting, compliance at risk, and rightfully so. As a former head of claims, it would
Yeah.
have pained me, but that's a fireable offense if they actually did that.
Mhm.
And he wouldn't have known any of that, and he meant well. But that's sort of ignorant money. And I don't mean that to put them down. It's well intentioned. And you saw this in .com as well in the late 90s. More recent money is much more insurance knowledgeable and specific. And by extension, I think CVC also ends up filling that gap. And I think the CVCs have evolved. A lot of them came in later stage. It would often be after they were already a customer and the business was thriving. So it tended to be kind of growth stage investments. I've seen a lot more CVCs who are now thinking about seed, or even some that are thinking pre-seed if the strategic alignment is there. And that's new.
Mm.
So my take is always, if you can get informed capital behind you, that's much better. And I have seen a shift there. And I think the CVCs are playing a part of that, which is fantastic. They should.
Yeah, we used to sort of not we didn't steer clear of CVCs, they just weren't as prominent, so we didn't see them as often, whereas we were interacting quite heavily with VCs and working with their portfolio companies. I think the observation I would make is that even in their sort of prominence, the CVCs are at more events, they speak, they're more public. And then also the complexion and the size of the CVC teams. They've invested in those teams, they have different people in those teams. And we were talking to, this is very rude, but the name escapes me, but someone who joined the QBE team and
Yeah.
came from a pure tech side of the fence, but they were bringing that in-house to complement their very good knowledge of insurance, corporate venture capital.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting play. So they're making their team more robust, that they can look at more options and things like very early stage pre-seed seed investments. So that's interesting. You made a comment, and I'll make this the last couple of questions, otherwise we're overstake. I'll welcome, but you made an interesting comment when we were talking the other day about the relationship between VC and underwriting and how it's like a mirror image. And I just thought that was a really good, I just thought it was a really good point. So I just wanted to kind of dig that up again for the audience that are listening in, and your observation there.
Yeah, it struck me the other day, like several months ago. I was giving a talk on innovation for a group of carrier CEOs, and they were really feeling stymied about how to get innovation kickstarted within their orgs. And they'd put money behind it and put people behind it. But like so many of us that have seen innovation teams, is like it gets so far, but then it never really gets into the business.
Yeah.
And so they wanted me to speak to kind of what are the barriers to that. And one of the things that struck me is I worked with a bunch of VCs as well. And so if you really think about it, underwriting in a carrier or looking at investments as a VC, it's the same analysis. You're looking at the risk of failure and success. But for a VC, I won't say they don't care about failure, because if they know something's going to fail or they think there's a high likelihood, they're not going to bother with it. But what they're trying to do is not avoid the losses. They're trying to find the really big winners. They'll get a couple singles, doubles, triples, but they're looking for the home runs or the grand slams, because they only need very few of those, and that will make the whole portfolio. Their downside is capped. You put in $1 million, it goes to zero. Worst case scenario, you've lost $1 million. But if you put $1 million in and it goes to 18 billion, well, you can make 1.8 or 180 million. I mean, many multiples of that million. So the upside is, I wouldn't say uncapped, there are bounds to it, but largely look at the underwriting side. It's completely the opposite. Best case scenario is your upside is premium minus commission and expense. So $100,000, maybe 40,000, like total upside from this effort. The downside, it could be uncapped depending on the line of business, but realistically, 5 mil limit, 3 mil limit, 2 mil. So your $40,000 potential upside is countered by a $5 million potential downside. So we're looking at the same thing. We're trying to evaluate the risk of failure and the potential of success. However, the insurers are trying to avoid the downsides, whereas a VC is only trying to spot those few winners and is not really bothered by the downside as much, to an extent, but effectively, that's not their worry. It's about finding those rare super winners. So we're both evaluating risk, but in completely the opposite dimension. And I say this to like new parents, is everyone warns you about sleep deprivation. And you're like, oh yeah, I understand. You know, I've had rough nights of sleep before. I've not slept for several days. I get it. And then you find yourself in that situation and you're like, I didn't understand at all. And now I know why I'm running into the wall in the middle of the night because I thought it was a doorway and I don't even remember what my home looks like. This is the same thing. We hear about it. We're like, oh, I understand. I've been looking at the downside. I need to now look for the few winners. And that's not what I was trained on, but it's the same tools. It's not that simple. It's deep in your wiring. It's sort of, it's like at a values basis subconsciously. So it's interesting. We have all the bits and pieces, but it's like we're switched in one polarity and they're switched in the other. And it's not that simple. That as smart as we are, we can't just be like, okay, I'll look the other way. It doesn't work that way. It's a much deeper change.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this, and then I thought about what it means about terms of and now I'm talking about innovation more in the terms of product creation inside traditional carriers. So creating new products or collaborating with, let's say, MGA ideas or insurance vehicles that you're providing capacity for. Do you think there's something wrong in the way that, not wrong, I suppose, backwards looking, but as we start to move into this world where actually a lot of the best ideas are going to come from outside parties and collaboration, and potentially the sort of huge uncapped opportunities in insurance are going to be new ideas that we don't currently underwrite or don't currently have products for. Do we reward in the wrong way? Because currently, if you're an underwriter or an underwriting leader, exactly that, you run your book studiously and you're trying to improve your loss ratio and you're trying to run a very sort of profitable book under those guidelines. But when you look at things like new ventures and new opportunities, new products, if they sit within your product line, we're not really rewarding those people for taking the true risk.
Yeah.
So do we have to sort of change probably that culture and that reward structure to really get that on board?
Yeah, I think so. You know, we are an industry where any new effort, frankly, is going to be a dog for some time. Small books are lumpy and lossy. And if they're not, it's just luck or the losses haven't developed yet. They will be soon enough. It's very hard to smooth out a couple of limit losses on a, small book. Like one limit loss of 5 mil on an $8 million business, you're in the hole. No matter, like, I don't care how little you're paying in commission or how little you pay your people. There's no way you're profitable in that book. And I've seen it. I've seen small books that, writing at an 800% plus combined ratio, it happens. But that's not the point of the business. It is to build it to something, but you have to be willing to sit through that difficult period. And it's the same thing we were just talking about. It's not how we're wired. And so if you're not willing as a leader to put the right structures in place, rewards and evaluation and otherwise, you're never going to get the willingness to invest in a new product, a new market segment, a new approach, what have you, because there's going to be some bedding in period. Either because the losses will just need to develop and the book will need to grow to scale where it smooths itself out, assuming it's a good business that you're writing right, which is a different question. But if not, at least you're making some investment that's going to be upfront expensive and you will not have had the cash flow and the profitability yet to deal with that investment. So you're going to take lumps for a few years just on a return basis. If you're not set up to deal with that, explicitly or implicitly, your people won't support it. Because why would they? It's the old fallacy of like paying for X and expecting Y. You're disincenting your people from doing that. I had the benefit of working for an incredible carrier for a number of years, running claims for them. And we talked about there were pieces of our business that we referred to as bets. And that had a different section of our business plan, a different section of our finances. Of course, we looked at everything in aggregate, but then we broke them out. We said on our mature businesses or our at scale businesses, here's how they're performing. And then we have our bets. And Google has done this with the 20% stuff. And I know they moved backwards on some of that, but you see that where some businesses are like, look, if we don't carve out an ability to innovate and evolve and try, then what we're saying is, regardless of what we state publicly, our actual strategy is cash cow. Like, we're just here to get the cash out of what we already have, what we inherited from someone else. And like, if you want to be a trust fund baby of a business, go for it. That's perfectly fine. That's your strategy. But let's be honest about that. Because I've also seen carriers that in practice are living that way, but they talk about innovation, they're putting money into it, and they're holding people responsible for it, yet they're not actually empowering them to chase it. And so then it's like you have the best of both worlds. I always say you can't claim you're broke and go buy a Porsche. Like, I'm not going to allow that. You got to choose a lane here. And that's exactly what goes on. So if you actually want to just milk your business, that's okay. That's a strategy, but let's be honest about it. If you actually care about growth and innovation and opportunity, that's okay too. There may be some downside to it. There is risk in that. And you must structure your compensation, the way you look at people, the way your business is built in a way that supports them actually going after that. This is back to those rational decisions, right? It's irrational to do it any other way. And we see that all the time. It's talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Yeah, I mean the if you think about it, a lot of underwriting compensation is, for example, salary is X, and then you can get 100% of X maximum bonus, and then every performance against that chips away at that 100%.
Yeah.
So we even operate our bonus structures in the same way a portfolio does, in that the most you can get is already kind of known ahead of time. Whereas you flip that on a VC, they get carry, and they get carry on their portfolio performance, and it
Yeah.
doesn't get, it's not limited to anything. And so there's a meeting of cultures there that we need to square the circle on. Bryan, I could talk to you forever, and we quite often get the opportunity to do that face to face, but it's a really exciting premise for a book, and thank you for writing it. I think it's a book that needs to be written about. So when does the book come out? How can people access it? We'll make sure we get that information in there.
Yeah. So the official launch date will be June 8th,
Mhm.
2023. So this year. It's less than a month away from recording this. I'm very excited, and it's actually available now for pre-order at Amazon. That's probably the easiest place for people to find it. If you want to learn more, they can go to future-of-insurance.com/3, the number 3, because it's the third volume. And a little bit of info on the book, a couple of links to pre-order, but whatever country you're in, go to your local Amazon, and it's there: print, Kindle, Audible, even hardcover. Which it
Wow.
always amazes me that people buy my books in hardcover. I'm like, you're really committing to owning my book. So thank you for that.
I must admit I won't do that, but
Yeah,
I
no,
but
that's okay.
I will read it. I will read it. So and the only reason I haven't read it, good people listening in, is because I only got it 3 days ago, and I have no time. So but no, I'm looking forward to reading it. Bryan, thank you. Pleasure as always. Really appreciate you being the guest on the Leadership and Insurance podcast.
Thanks so much, Alex.